Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are joining us from today. My name is Dimfna van der Lans, and I am the CEO of the Clean Cooking Alliance. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you for the second in our series of conversations on clean cooking. In August of this year, we kicked off this series as part of CCA's 10-year anniversary celebrations. The first conversation with former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and CCA Leadership Council member Wanjira Matai highlighted the significant progress we've made on clean cooking over the past decade, but it also emphasized the urgent need for increased innovation, impact, and investments to deliver clean cooking solutions to the 2.6 billion people who live each day without it. I am so pleased to be holding our second conversation on the International Day of Rural Women to discuss the critical role of women in accelerating progress towards achieving universal access to clean cooking, and the importance of engaging the trade community in establishing an inclusive, enabling environment to support a robust and sustainable clean cooking industry. I am honored to be joined by such a distinguished panel today. Ambassador Jean-Marie Paugam, Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. Ambassador Ahmad Makaila, WTO Ambassador from Chad. Phoebe Makungu, Deputy Director for Gender and Development in Kenya's Ministry of Energy. Rima Nanavati, Director of the Self-Employed Women's Association in India. And Nehas Journey, co-founder and CEO of Greenway Appliances. I would like to set the stage for today's conversation by starting with you, DG. The sustainable use of stoves and fuels for cooking by all households provides a fundamental, yet maybe not well-known intersection between trade, women, and the environment. Access to affordable clean stoves and fuels has the potential to mitigate risks related to climate, health, livelihoods, and the environment, and can be a powerful driver of women's empowerment. Given this context, do you think this issue could be explored more by the WTO Secretariat to showcase that the WTO is indeed close to the people your Director General often refers to?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. I'd like to thank you, Dimfna, and the Clean Cooking Alliance for your partnership and your invitation.
DDG, I think we're having a hard time hearing you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Now it's much better.
Oh, it's much better? Okay.
Yes.
Well, good afternoon. I was just thanking you, Dimfna, for your kind words and invitation, and also the partnership that we have with the Clean Cooking Alliance. I'm very pleased that the WTO Secretariat has been working with you to co-organize this event today. And as you rightly remind us, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, our boss here at the WTO, rightly says that trade is about people. And she just says this because she has read the Marrakesh Agreement, which is our founding document, and it is more or less what it says in more legalistic terms. And from that perspective, I do believe that the question of access to affordable clean stoves and fuel is both important for people, for the people, and it's indeed a very smart question, not always easy to answer for WTO work. It is important because you reminded us that the clean cook stoves and fuel have huge potential to improve the health, livelihoods, and environmental conditions of living for the close to 3 billion people who still rely heavily on traditional stoves and fuels to feed their families. I think it's a smart question because it strikes directly at the nexus of gender empowerment, health, development, environment, and climate change. And when you look at what we do at the WTO has some mandate for fostering discussions on trade and the environment, on trade and development, on trade and gender. And I may add, because it's related, although more indirectly, on small and medium-sized enterprises. So necessarily, the question of clean cooking resonate powerfully for us. So my straight answer at first sight is yes, this issue has a creative potential for the WTO Secretariat. Now, there are some questions immediately coming thereafter. And the first one is there a trade policy angle? Is trade policy really relevant to the issue of access to clean stoves. Is there really a trade dimension? And here again, at first glance, the answer is also positive. It's also yes. I have read one presentation which was made in front of your alliance some years ago, which suggests that in some markets, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of taxes and tariffs on cook stoves can reach or exceed 50% of the global price of the devices, including sometimes applied to the cost of freight. And so therefore, yesterday I have run a check with my colleagues of the International Trade Center, and it gave very interesting results. I think at this stage I must really thank and pay tribute to Mondar Mimouni and his team, because I just called them yesterday afternoon, and quite frankly, they did a fantastic crash job. And there are some key findings that preliminary findings that I'll be happy to share with you. The first one is that the trade flow of stoves and cooking appliances is very much concentrated in 3 regions of the world: East Asia, Europe, and North America. And there is an important export potential toward other regions because trade per capita is very low on these appliances. So this immediately suggests that one of the regions most in need in terms of improvement of the clean cooking is being essentially excluded from the trade. And this region is Africa, because Africa is representing only 4% of the global imports on these cook stove devices and 1% of global export. That's the first finding. Second finding is that the trade flow of inputs, that is the components needed for the manufacturing of the appliances, globally follow the same patterns. Mostly the regions supply from themselves the components that they need. But here again, it's very interesting to see that Africa is not supplying itself, but tend to export some of its output toward other markets. So Africa is not industrializing its own processes, but export the input that it has. And the third very important finding is that the level of tariff protection is very heterogeneous. All in all, we can see that tariffs on inputs and appliances are not particularly high in the EU and Western Europe, neither in North America. They start being a little higher in East Asia, while East Asia tend to increase its regional preference. It's 1% tariff rate between the members of East Asia, but it becomes 11% on a most favored nation for the rest of the world, most favored nation basis. And what is again really striking is that Africa stands as a region with the highest average trade protection, both for inputs of components and for finished products. The average protection is 20% of tariff, which also suggests that there might be a link between the low trade on clean cooking devices and the level of protection. So is there a trade issue here? Yes, I can confirm that the first finding shows that there is a trade issue here. Now, maybe you would like me to touch upon what can we do about it? And I'll briefly say what the Secretariat of the WTO could try to do to help the cause. I think there are 3 or 4 things. The first one, of course, is awareness that we are doing together at this moment in our partnership. We are really interested in continuing and deepening this effort. The second one is we can contribute to research and analysis to better understand the impact of trade policy on clean cooking stoves and fuel. You can do that hand in hand with our siblings from UNCTAD and ITC, and also reach out to the World Bank, which I think has already done some work. Third, we can help our members, the WTO members, to identify the entries that could prove relevant to initiate some trade discussion on the matter. There is obviously one entry in our Trade and Environment Committee, but we also have an informal group on trade and gender, also Miss initiative that I mentioned earlier. Last, we have technical assistance programs, which can also be mobilized in favor of integrating access to more efficient, cleaner solutions for cooking and fuels. You know that the WTO leads the global Aid for Trade initiatives, which every 2 years is being convened here in our premises. So these are the kind of avenues, the menu of options that we could mobilize. I look forward, I've been too long, sorry. I look forward to engaging with you more during this panel. Thank you.
No, absolutely. And I think all of those were really helpful suggestions and contributions to this conversation. And I think from my perspective, more than anything, our partnership with the WTO that we're currently developing and exploring is really inspiring, because it is an issue that hasn't been discussed enough between those communities, like the entrepreneurs, the organizations, and the policymakers that really focus on creating a healthy ecosystem for clean cooking solutions, and the trade community to make sure that those imbalances are addressed, and that there is, I think, from the perspective of at least the businesses, a predictable trade policy environment in which they can operate and continue to grow their businesses so that they can indeed serve the customers that we're all ultimately trying to reach, the families in all the different regions that we're working in. So I think all of those are really helpful interventions. And I could see some of the other participants already nodding in agreement, as in how difficult some of these trade imbalances are if you are trying to survive and thrive as an entrepreneur in this ecosystem. So I think all of that was really helpful. And again, we are really honored to be working with you as well. And it's been a wonderful partnership already. Maybe if I may, I could move over to you, Ambassador Michaela, because you are representing the sort of least developed countries within the WTO. And I'm sure you're hearing a lot of stories about how it negatively impacts women and families who don't have access to clean cooking, and your perspective on what could be done to elevate this issue within Geneva and making sure that that convening power gets multiplied and really strengthened in the coming years. Ambassador, over to you. Ambassador Michaela?
Merci.
Yes.
Merci beaucoup. D'abord, bonsoir à tout le monde. Je voudrais tout naturellement commencer par vous remercier. Je vais faire doucement parce que je parle dans une langue étrange qui n'est pas toujours comprise. Alors voilà, si les traductions sont déjà en place. Donc, j'étais en train de dire, de vous présenter toutes mes excuses, de faire ma présentation éventuellement en langue française. Mais puisqu'il y a des services de traduction excellents, je pense que je peux compter sur leur concours. Alors, merci déjà beaucoup pour nous associer à cet échange. Je crois que mon ami, le directeur général adjoint Paugam a déjà planté le décor et vous a donné un peu ce que ça représente pour les PMA, la question en discussion. Je tiens à rappeler que la question énergétique sous-tend de nombreux objectifs de développement durable. Elle concerne de manière large le groupe des PMA. Aujourd'hui encore, plus d'1 milliard de personnes n'ont pas accès à l'électricité et 40% de la population, c'est-à-dire 3 milliards de personnes, brûlent de combustibles solides tels que le bois et les excréments d'animaux pour cuisiner et se chauffer, emplissant leur foyer de polluants dangereux. Très bien. Donc, j'étais en train de dire que les chiffres que j'ai rappelés donnent déjà une idée de la complexité de la question pour les PMA. Et comme vous le savez, les PMA sont constitués en grande majorité de pays africains. Mais nous avons également des pays de l'Asie du Sud, des pays du Caraïbe avec Haïti. Et donc, singulièrement, c'est la partie du monde où il est quasiment impossible par endroit de parler de cuisine propre. J'ai parlé des combustibles qui sont brûlés pour avoir de l'énergie, et ceci a un impact considérable déjà sur la santé, mais également en termes d'économie. On passe beaucoup plus de temps, comme vous le savez, avec ces combustibles, et en termes de gain du temps, les utilisateurs de cette partie du monde éprouvent quelques difficultés, contrairement à la partie du monde où les pays sont plus développés. Alors, l'absence de sources d'énergie moderne a également d'autres conséquences pour les utilisateurs qui assurent souvent la responsabilité principale pour les sources d'énergie dans leur foyer. Alors, chaque jour, elles passent des heures à collecter du combustible et à transporter de lourdes charges. Cela représente, une fois agrégée, une ressource importante qui aurait pu être allouée à une production plus rémunératrice. Alors, pour en revenir à votre question, quand vous me demandez ce qu'on peut faire à partir de Genève, j'avoue que je n'ai pas de réponse, si ce n'est que nous travaillons effectivement pour que les balances commerciales soient plus équilibrées, pour que les femmes, par leur autonomie, aient plus de ressources pour avoir accès à cette cuisine propre, parce qu'il est question fondamentalement de moyens. Parce que encore faudrait-il qu'on ait les infrastructures nécessaires pour accéder à cette cuisine propre. Je dois dire que c'est une problématique qui nous préoccupe en tant que pays les moins développés. Et l'ODD, l'objectif de développement pour le développement durable, au point 7, n'est-ce pas, intègre l'accès à des services énergétiques modernes et indispensables au développement. Il vise à accroître de manière significative la part des énergies renouvelables dans le mix énergétique, à l'heure où plus de 80% de la consommation de la planète repose sur des énergies fossiles, et multiplié par 2 l'amélioration de l'efficacité énergétique. Donc voilà ce que je peux dire sur la question. Au niveau du groupe, en tout cas ici à Genève, nous sommes bien conscients du retard qui est le nôtre, et nous travaillons avec nos partenaires de manière à trouver les voies et moyens pour faire face avec plus d'efficacité à cette question qui, ma foi, est une question prégnante.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those remarks. And I do fully agree with your assessment that the impacted countries are really significantly suffering from what I would also say is a lack of access to the appropriate financing, and making sure that the global development community really pays attention to these issues the way it should. And so I think absolutely that comment is duly noted. I would now like to move to from Geneva to hear some perspectives from the field. We're delighted to have 3 impactful and insightful women in India and Kenya who are working hard on these issues daily. Having worked with all of you, let me just say that your dedication, your tenacity, and your humility are an inspiration to me personally daily as well. I would like to start with Rima. Rima, you are a long-time champion of improving women's livelihoods, in particular women's opportunity for entrepreneurship and access to markets. What are some of the common trade barriers that you have seen women face in India and across the globe? Rima?
Namaste, and thank you so much, Dimfina, for bringing me in this conversation, and congratulations to you and the Clean Cooking Alliance on your 10th anniversary. And I think that it's nothing that, could be more precise and relevant to discuss today on the World Rural Women's Day than clean cooking, trade, and women, especially rural women. I think to the question that you are asking as to, what are some of the trade barriers that the women actually face? And I would bring the message on behalf of the 1.9 million members of SEVA, all women workers in the informal economy. And I think we strive to achieve full employment and self-reliance. And self-reliance in the last couple of decades has started encompassing energy security, because we see that access to clean energy also is an enabler to reduce or address poverty. So I think coming to the whole point of trade barriers, very often, these informal sector women, they do not know where the raw material is coming from or where are the finished goods going to, which is the market where the finished goods are going to. Their tools are very old and outdated. The producers or the workers are all scattered. And they are at the very, very fag end of the global supply chains. So they normally work as subcontract workers. So they are completely invisible out of the global supply chains. And therefore they are the hardest hit when the trade treaties, the trade agreements, and the changes in the trade agreements happen. Let me give you an example of, the women who work for about 8 or 9 months in the desert and produce rock salt. And, in order to bring them or lift them out of poverty, the most important was access to clean energy. Because in absence of clean energy, they were using diesel pumps to pump out water. And once they had this access, I think it tremendously saved their expenses. But then the market of the salt slumped. And I think, in spite of having technical inputs, access to clean energy, it increased their productivity. But the women were not able to have, enough of income. Now, if we look at the external factors that pose the challenges, are the supply chain of the goods and the supply chain of the components needed for effectively and productively using the goods. The classic example I would like to bring is the availability of clean cooking methods. In itself becomes a challenge for the women workers. And the challenge gets compounded as soon as we include the challenges of supply chain of the fuels, because recently that is what we are experiencing in countries like ours in South Asia. And therefore, the promotion of clean cooking method and its corresponding fuels must be taken into consideration. And I think I would like to really tell here that it needs a whole holistic approach and infrastructure also to under one roof, so that the grassroots women globally are able to pick up trade and eventually become the leaders, the owners and managers of their own supply chains. They get integrated higher into the value chain. And I'm so thrilled when I heard the DDG saying that they would be willing to invest in awareness, into research, into technical, and that is what precisely is needed. So I think nothing more could be asked on Rural Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Rima. And thank you also for lifting up those voices of the women who are very much at the end of that global supply chain and who, as you described, are invisible, which is really unacceptable because they do have such strong contributions to make. And I remember when I was traveling with you in India, the inspiration that I think I always get from sort of that same sort of tenacity and dedication to supporting themselves, their families, and their communities in elevating the issue is really inspiring. And I wonder if you could share just one example of what has inspired you with some of the women's groups that really focus on clean cooking specifically and how they are elevating themselves, their families, and their communities, Rima. Can you unmute yourself, Rima?
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I think some of the examples that I would really like to share here of, what women could really do in terms of, building their entrepreneurship is organizing is the key. And unless and until, women are organized, for an individual woman to access clean cooking, to really work around it. But once women are organized, women own and manage the distribution, the production, and the management of the clean cooking or the clean energy enterprises, then I think there is no looking back. Let me give you an example of, one of our women. She's a member of a self-help group and a federation. And I think she said to me that, I do want to live a life of peace, which is without any stress and tension. And I said, so what do you mean by that? And she said, I want to take a loan to buy a clean cook stove. And she took out a loan to buy a clean cook stove. And not only today she has given access to 15,000 women in their households with clean cook stove. And having seen what are the difficulties in getting refilling of those, cylinders or anything of that sort, I think she moved on to have her own biogas so that she can compost, because every village also has cattle. And so that's what she started. And now she's looking at how can she have a solar run cook stove. So I think if women are given the opportunity, the enabling environment and the policies, then I think women are able to equip and enable themselves in moving out of poverty, reducing their drudgery. And I think that's where I think I would again welcome you, Dimfna, and bring Neha Ben along to look at, how members like Saroj Ben and see what can be done in the area of clean cooking and in the area of women's enterprises. I would just like to end by giving 5 messages from our women. And that is that access to clean energy or clean cooking, and that is seldom not available to women workers in the informal sector. Transition from unclean to clean energy or cooking is a process, and we need to understand and invest in that process at the pace of the women. Clean energy, clean cooking, and SDGs, especially income and education, that when linked properly, then adoption happens much faster. You see that thousands, and not thousands, millions of women come forward to take on, clean cooking and clean energy appliances. Building capacities and skills is also utmost important. And last but not least, and the most important, is financing and investing in clean energy and clean cooking. So these are the 5 pillars based on our approach and on the enterprises that Seva has built up, which brings energy, income security, better health, and a better future for women. And I would really urge Clean Cooking Alliance and the WTO to look at, when we are talking about new economic pathways, how do we look at investing in women? What kind of trade barriers are there for women to avail and access energy and clean cooking in a much, much better way? Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Rima. Thank you. And I think that's a really nice segue to shift our attention towards Neha, an inspiring leader, woman who runs her own business, supplying clean cooking solutions. And maybe Neha, if you could share with us and the audience a little bit some of your journey as an entrepreneur and some of your challenges, but then also touch a little bit, if you can, on Rima's last point around specifically what kind of trade barriers did you have to overcome to continue to grow your business, Neha?
Yes, thank you, Dimfna, and thank you to the WTO team and the Clean Cooking Alliance for inviting me. I will just give a quick entrepreneur's perspective to what has been my journey and my experience till date. So I run an organization which is about 10 years old. And over the years, we are based out of India. And over the years, we've manufactured and sold close to 1.2 million clean cook stoves, with a focus on efficient manufacturing and streamlining the supply chain from, the supply side of things to the extent possible. So we've faced pretty much all challenges that manufacturing entrepreneurs have, and realized beyond what we imagined initially how interconnected the global supply chains are. Something happens in one part of the world, the cost of this little stove goes up that we sell, and that realization has been quite stark. And while this is the case for all products, I do want to highlight that clean cooking as a product category is something that affects each and every household very intimately, and it cannot be perhaps treated at par with just another manufactured product. It needs to be given special attention, given how important it is to a household's health, and a household's productivity also to participate in the economy or participate in the world at large. And even more so for women, and even more so for rural women. I think if we want to if we want to have a big enabler for rural women, then clean cooking is the way to go, whether you're talking about the environment, health, productivity, economics, all of that. And I do want to highlight that there is it's a challenging space, and we've tried over the years, we've tried collaborating with entrepreneurs in different parts of the world to see if we can combine some of our manufacturing strengths or some of our supply strengths to build a product together in another part of the world. And it is hugely challenging. There are tariff regimes where sometimes components are taxed more than the finished product. And there are tariff regimes that are just detrimental to any kind of collaborative approach, collaborative supply chain approach, which I hope you will solve for us soon enough. And but having said that, there's just, I think the next decade or the next 4 or 5 years, we'll see a lot of, while we talk about investments or so, there is definitely an upswing in the way people are looking at clean cooking, and you would see a lot more supply chain interventions in this space. It is a supply chain intense sector. It is fortunately or unfortunately not a problem that we can solve with an app, which somehow today a lot of problems tend to go in that direction. It is a very supply chain intensive sector in both the cooking asset as well as fuels. And we'll have to have more collaboration, South-South collaboration or global collaboration to make some of those supply chains work. And we need to do something extra to make the trade and tariff barriers go away to the extent possible. There is entrepreneurial activity, and sometimes these barriers take away from the entrepreneur's energy or make some things impossible or very difficult, which I hope can go away.
Thank you, Neha. And I think it highlights some of the interventions and the things that were shared by you, DDG, about some of the lessons that you learned from an assessment around sort of those trade imbalances around clean cooking and clean cooking solutions that I agree, Neha, will not be solved immediately, but are definitely excited. And I think it's a great opportunity to be working together more closely with WTO and regional trade bodies as well, to continue to really look at this issue and do the right analysis so we can continue to support entrepreneurs like yourself who are leading the way, and as you say, are really doing amazing work, but find it sometimes really challenging to continue their energy and continue to focus if the trade policies and other policies are difficult to understand. Let's just say it that way. And so I think, if it's okay, I would love to move over to you, Phoebe, and ask you to share some of your journey as you were really spearheading and in your own way, very groundbreaking, to establish a gender policy for the Ministry of Energy in Kenya that we were proud to launch at the Clean Cooking Forum in Nairobi in 2019, I should say. And so would wonder if you can share some of your lessons there, and specifically how it relates to what you see could be done around the trade environment in Kenya, in Africa specifically. Phoebe, over to you.
Thank you very much. Everyone, receive greetings from Kenya. I'm very glad and privileged to be here. And right from the discussion that we've so far had, I can say that everything revolves around a conducive environment, a policy framework, and that's what, as a government, we are obliged to do. So speaking from the government perspective, I can say it's very, very important for countries to create an enabling environment for trade to strive. And this can only be done if there are very responsive policies and incentives that can promote trade and inclusivity in everything that we do. It is against this background that as a country or as a Ministry of Energy, we saw it very, very important to come up with a standalone gender policy. And one of the key issues that informed this decision was the fact that we realized energy is a very technical and infrastructure sector, and we felt for us to achieve our goals very well, we need a responsive way of doing things. So this, in 2019, we developed the gender policy that really sought to correct the existing gender gaps in the sector by integrating gender considerations in energy projects, programs, and or even monitoring and evaluation. And this was a very good key indicator where we indicated all the existing gaps, and we felt this policy was very, very handy in bridging those gaps so that we can include everyone on board. And then the policy also sought to enhance inclusivity in access to energy services by promoting access to energy and benefits by both men and women. Now, in this case, we felt, as I had said earlier, energy being such a tech, it was perceived, it's generally perceived like it's quite too technical, it's male-dominated, and we felt it's not just good to keep saying women have to be beneficiaries of clean energy or energy services. We want women to do business in energy, and we had to come up with strategies to encourage more women to come on board and know that there are opportunities in the sector. And then one of the biggest components of the policy was to promote clean cooking solutions and environmental sustainability. And this was informed from the existing data. And I speak for Kenya and actually generally the East African region as a whole. As we speak now in Kenya, 66% of Kenyans rely on solid biomass. Out of this, 55 use firewood and 11.6% use charcoal. And in the rural Kenya, 84% of the population use firewood as the primary source of cooking. So we had, this is real key, and it's really not different from the neighboring East African countries. So we realized we really have work. And what we have to do is to aggressively come up with policies and programs to ensure we bridge this gap and promote clean cooking in the sector. And to achieve better, we felt we need to have women come on board so that we work with both men and women to enable them especially women to do business in the sector. So maybe briefly, I'll just share how much what we've been able to achieve. After the policy came in place, we've seen a lot of progress. First of all, I'm even happy to share that I think by next week, the ministry is going to carry out a monitoring and evaluation, and it is performing an agenda impact assessment on the biogas programs that we've been installing in the country. And this is such a great achievement. And at the moment, we've been able to establish an energy sector agenda committee, which comprises all our stakeholders, the energy power entities, and the relevant ministries. So we work together as a team to implement key issues and key gender components in the ministry. And at the moment, we've already come up with the agenda impact assessment tool, which is going to guide in conducting all gender impact assessments in the ministry. And we have disseminated the policy at the moment to county governments. In Kenya, we have two levels of government. We have the national government and the subnational government. And it was the subnational government is the local area, the local regions, which are very, very key in this. So we've partnered, we've gone to the county governments to sensitize them and to show them importance of integrating gender components in their energy planning. And we've really emphasized on clean cooking as one of the key components that really have to be taken up if we are to achieve universal access and get the just transitions at from the local level up to the national level. And then the policy is now being disseminated to power entities, and we are really doing well. And probably I can say that having a gender policy was really an eye opener, and it has helped us more focused. And we are now reaching out to all actors in the sector to make sure that we achieve universal access as a whole. But maybe briefly, just to mention how trade, how it can improve trade, the cricket environment through the policy framework. We can say that this sector has always been perceived as male-dominated. So women would shy away mostly from doing business, or they think it is very high intense. So to promote access to promote universal access to energy, clean cooking, it is very, very important to demystify. Through the policy, we've been able to demystify this notion by creating awareness to women entrepreneurs on the existing opportunities in the sector, so that we are now encouraging more women to come and do business, especially through the procurement. In Kenya, we have a policy that is called the AGPO, Access to Government Procurement Opportunities, where it's a special category that allows women, the youth, and people living with disability to do business in the sector. So it was very hard to achieve this special category, these people to do business. But since we did the policy and we've been doing a lot of sensitization, we've seen a very high increase in uptake by the women and youth in at least doing some business and doing supplies. But we want to do more so that we can also encourage them to do a lot more business in energy solutions or clean cooking technologies. So this has been it has been a very good indicator, and we feel through that, through a proper policy framework and inclusion of women entrepreneurs, it's very important to achieve the better outcomes in achieving the SDGs and just transitions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. And it's really inspiring to hear how far along you've come on this journey since you were able to launch this exciting policy at the forum. So it's really inspiring to listen to that story. And I specifically liked your really concrete example of what you have done to make sure women have access to the right incentives so that they can continue to contribute and engage in the clean cooking ecosystem, which is really important. I know we're almost running out of time, but I have a couple of quick questions I would really welcome all of your inputs on. And there's one specifically around the fact that from what we have learned, there hasn't been done enough research on sort of gender equality and trade together. And so wondered for example, Neha, from your perspective, like what kind of data points, what kind of research do you think would be helpful for the clean cooking ecosystem to continue to grow and support businesses like yours?
Hello.
Yes.
So yes, support is needed on many fronts, of course, but I do want to say that in terms of data points, it's important to track I mean, there are two things. There's on the demand side, how the markets are evolving, and of course, on the supply side, what are some of these sort of anti-enablers that we can get rid of. I mean, since we are under the purview of the WTO, and I have a little bit of an audience here, we don't want to see that clean cooking solutions be elevated as an important product category, and international trade or collaboration on the supply chain side be made simpler. There needs to be a clear a clear intention to make that happen, only and only because it is such an extremely important intervention that, that touches each and every one of us. We cannot go without eating, and we have to cook to eat that way. So in terms of data points, I think some of those enablers, a lot of entrepreneurs like myself, we enter a new market, or we try to enter into a new partnership and kind of understand the implications of these trade tariffs, etc., a lot later. And by that time, we wish we had done something about them earlier. So I think those data points would be important. And like Rima and Phoebe have already pointed out, that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the market side. This is just a great platform for women, a virtuous platform for women where women can contribute and also gain a lot from as well. And yes, please, let's just do something about it as soon as we can.
No, absolutely, Neha. And I think that's a really nice segue into what is probably my final question for you, DDG, because I do think there is such a need for this increased collaboration between the sectors and the global and regional trade communities. And so my question for you is, like, from your perspective, what do you think governments, international organizations, and the private sector can start doing today so that we collectively create those right conditions to ensure that women across the globe benefit from trade instead of being left behind? DDG.
Well, thank you very much, Dimfna, and thank you for all the very inspiring intervention. I think we have a starting point at the WTO, which is a trade and gender initiative. And to some extent, it is completing the equipment that we had. I think on research, we have done a lot of progress about trade and gender. One very good report was a report of the World Bank in 2020, which tells you approximately everything we know at this stage on the issue. On technical assistance, we have been catching up fast, and it was an emerging issue 10 years ago. Now it's becoming mainstream to include support to gender empowerment. Now, on trade policy, we are still at an exploring level in this area, and this is a gap that the Initiative on Trade and Gender is trying to fill. Now, coming more directly to what can we do, and to try to pick up the point from Neha, what can we do in WTO context to help stop tackling those trade barriers? Well, the first thing that we need to do is to test the appetite of our members. If some of them want to champion the issue, our members are states. These are the ones who can make the agenda. And if there are some of our members who would like to open the conversation, then we have all the forums that I mentioned previously. And I think the first one could really well be the Committee on Trade and Environment to open this conversation. We have some precedents of sector-based trade negotiation in the organization on pharmaceutical, on IT products, on environmental product goods, which has been frozen a little bit. So it's not unknown to us. I don't know of a precedent of a product-based negotiation, but why not? I mean, this could be absolutely thinkable if our members would have the appetite. What I can say about that is, first, I have observed that product-based approaches can generate a lot of traction, political traction, because they are simple to understand. The public opinion see what we are doing. And I think to a large extent, the Cooking Alliance proposition could be part of this political traction. Now, from a WTO more technical point of view, we have a toolbox which can accommodate a lot of approaches. For instance, if we are talking about the tariff barriers, which were mentioned by Neha, there is several ways to tackle tariff barriers. It can be multilaterally, it can be plurilaterally, it can be regionally, it can even be unilaterally. Nobody prevents any country, any members to erase or lower its tariff unilaterally in the WTO. What is prevented is rising it. But in that case, that's not exactly what we want to do. Same thing in terms of standards and regulation. Some trade sectors use the tool of labeling, and including ethical or environmental labeling is perfectly recognized by the agreements of the WTO. We have a committee specialized in that kind of discussion, which is trade barriers, technical barriers to trade committee, to make sure that there is no discrimination in terms of using standards or disguised protection. So what I'm meaning is that we have the toolbox, we have the legal apparatus, which is very accommodating. We all need to know whether our members, and it's in their hand, want to pick up the issue at one point. So that's a little bit of your lobbying job, I suppose, and we can partner with you in terms of giving outreach to our members. Thank you.
No, absolutely. That's a really generous offer, and one that I already know we will be taking you up on. And so we really look forward to continuing this collaboration with WTO and address all those different parts and elements of the toolbox that you were referencing, DGG, because I do think, I think it was Rima who mentioned that it needs a holistic approach. We need to make sure we're covering all of it, and we think about the unintended consequences as well when we make some of these decisions, and not limit or harm unintended or parts of the ecosystem that we don't want to leave behind if that occurs. And so I think this conversation has really been wonderful and remarkable, because in my tenure at this organization, which is about 3 years now, I don't think we've really had this. I don't think we've really engaged substantially yet with the trade community. And so it is a real honor and it's a real privilege to have spent an hour with all of you today to start this conversation and continue us on a journey. Because as you said, DDG, why not, right? Now is the time to really collaboratively address this issue and be creative and innovative and take risks and be bold and move forward to make sure that we do indeed reach universal access by 2030 for everybody in the world. And so with that, I think thanking all of you for your participation and your willingness to engage and your dedication, your tenacity, as I said, which is very much needed in our ecosystem. And thank you so much to the WTO for partnering with us on this really important event, on this really important day. And so thank you all, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.